Hi, I'm Susie Garden, and this is the Ageless and Awesome podcast. I'm an age-defying naturopath and clinical nutritionist, and I'm here to bust myths around women's health and aging so that you can be ageless and awesome in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. The Ageless and Awesome podcast is dedicated to helping women through perimenopause and menopause with great health, a positive mindset, and outrageous confidence. Hit subscribe or follow now, and let's get started. Hello, gorgeous one, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ageless and Awesome podcast. I'm really happy to be here this week with our final series, or in our series of skin, and particularly related to perimenopause. And this topic, particularly this week, really sent me down a rabbit hole. I learned so much. I'm going to be a little bit sad to be at the end of this skin series because it's so interesting. And I think I'm going to do another one probably in another couple of months after covering a few other topics that I want to get into over the next coming weeks. So today I'm going to talk about a concept that you may not have heard of before. I didn't know a lot about it, to be honest, and I'm so excited and so glad that I was able to get into it this week. So the topic is going to be all around the mind-skin connection. Now we've covered over the past few weeks the gut-skin connection. And I've talked about in other episodes the gut-brain connection, but the brain-skin or mind-skin connection is not something that I've really talked about that much. I mean, it seems obvious, right? That, of course, if we have a gut-brain connection and a gut-skin connection, surely there's a possibility of a mind-skin connection. But I was really fascinated by everything that I discovered in my reading about this. And yet again, like many of the things that I talk about on the podcast, the knowledge around this is still growing. The knowledge around this has only recently been discovered. And when I say recent, in science, recent is easily up to 10 years, maybe longer. And the kind of research papers that I was reading this week to research the podcast were kind of 2016, some were 2013, but mainly from 2016 onwards is when the research kind of accelerated in this topic. And it's still a lot that we need to learn. But I guess what I wanted to start with, a common theme over the last few podcasts when we're talking about skin is that what is going on inside reflects on the outside. And those of you that have been following me for a while, when I talked more about anti-aging, my little tagline was anti-aging is an inside job. And it's exactly that. What's going on inside reflects on the outside. And when you think about the skin, it is our largest organ. It's huge. And it is also an organ of detoxification. So if things aren't working well from a detox point of view on the inside, that's where you're going to see blemishes, whether that's a rash, whether that's acne, whether that's other things, itchiness, etc. going on in the skin. That can definitely be because of detox and maybe a little bit of a sluggish detox system going on in your body. It's also a big reflector of our physical stress as well as our emotional stress. And I think we've all had that kind of situation where maybe you're under a lot of emotional stress, particularly as a younger woman, a teenager, when there's exams and things going on. If you're a student, that you can break out, right? It just shows how that physical stress, that emotional stress can impact our skin. So, and this thing is that the idea that the mind and the emotions can influence your skin and your skin's appearance has a bunch of science to support it. And as I mentioned, it's still ongoing research. It is a really interesting area of research. And this works both ways. You know, when you think about it, when your skin isn't looking great, if you've got things like acne, eczema, like I do, I think I mentioned in the podcast last week, I found it quite embarrassing to have these rash on my hands. particularly as a healthcare professional, but I think in anyone, and particularly when I started getting eczema on my face, which is like, oh my God, and it's really hard to cover up. But if you've got lesions going on, whether that is from eczema, whether it's from psoriasis, maybe even if it is some signs of aging that you're not liking, like sagging or wrinkles or discoloration on the skin, you think about, how does it make you feel? It might make you feel embarrassed like me, or it might make you feel like, I don't know, upset, depressed. There certainly are very high levels of depression and anxiety in people that have skin disorders. And the thought is it probably goes both ways. There is a sense that, if you're not liking what you're seeing in the mirror or seeing on your skin, that's going to cause those feelings of anxiety or depression. But there's also the other way around, is perhaps having this condition or these conditions can actually cause that mental health to kind of deteriorate a little bit. So this mind-skin connection, it's really hard to say for me because I'm so used to talking about gut-brain and gut-skin, etc. But mind-skin connection is a really interesting kind of concept. And so bringing it into perimenopause, why is this relevant? Okay, so again, if you're a longer term listener, you would have heard me talk about, when I talk about stress, I talk about the HPA axis. So I'm just going to get a little technical just for a minute. So HPA axis stands for hypothalamus, which is a little part right in the center of your brain. It is like a master controller of our stress response and our relaxation response. It talks directly to your pituitary gland. It's also in your brain. So that's your H and your P. And then you've got the A part, which is your adrenals. So you also, just by the way, have an HPO axis, which is ovary, and an HPT axis, which is your thyroid. But the HPA axis is what I'm going to focus on today. So we know we have an HPA axis. It controls our stress response. And what we also know in perimenopause is that when we have this drop in progesterone, which happens, it can destabilize our HPA axis. That's why a lot of women in their 40s and 50s can be more prone to anxiety. You can be more prone to panic attacks, to feelings of stress and finding it difficult to cope with things that you used to be able to cope with. And it's because of your hormones. Surprise. And one of the ways that me as a clinician can kind of assess that, because there are tests you can do. You can look at your cortisol levels. You can do that through saliva. I quite like using salivary cortisol tests because it tests through different time points of the day. But one of the main kind of symptoms that I'm looking for, and if you're a client of mine, I'll always ask about sleep. And then one of the key questions I ask is, do you wake refreshed? And the reason being is having insomnia is definitely a perimenopausal sign, but it can be something else, of course. But when you're having enough sleep and you are waking unrefreshed, that can be a sign of something called dysregulated cortisol, because our cortisol is supposed to be up a little bit in the morning to get us up out of bed, to raise up our blood pressure, etc. If we're waking unrefreshed, then perhaps our cortisol is not at the level that it needs to be, and that's when we call it a HPA or dysfunctional HPA axis, or HPA axis dysfunction. It's the kind of new term for adrenal fatigue. And so we have this HPA axis. We know that when we are in perimenopause, it can be a little bit destabilized because of that drop in progesterone. And the thing is, researchers have discovered a skin HPA axis. So actually in our skin cells, there is an HPA axis where the hormones that control your stress response are released from skin cells in response to stress, which kind of blew my mind a little bit, to be honest, because that is pretty full on. So what happens is when your skin your skin cells are starting to release these stress type hormones, they send messages into your hypothalamus, into your adrenal glands, and that can trigger cortisol to be released. Cortisol can trigger inflammatory responses in the body, which increases your symptoms, say, for example, of eczema, of psoriasis, of acne, of rosacea. And if you do have one of these conditions, you may notice that if you have an increase in stress, that it will flare up your skin symptoms. I certainly know that with my own eczema. And emotional distress can disrupt the skin's natural barrier function as well. So that can increase its sensitivity, and it can mean that the skin's dehydrated because the barrier is just not working well to actually keep the moisture into your skin. And I talked a lot about this in last week's podcast, so you may want to just review that. So this in perimenopause, because we have this destabilization of our HPA axis, it can make skin issues more exacerbated. So if you are getting things like hormonal acne in relationship with your perimenopause, yes, it's this hormonal disturbance, and part of it could be a stress response as well, which is really fascinating to me. It's certainly not something that I was taught when I was at uni. Maybe I was probably there just a little bit too early because this is fairly new research. But this is why, as clinicians, we constantly keep up with our research so that we are able to then transfer the learnings from that into our treatment plans with clients. So now that we know that we have this HPA axis in our skin, we have this mind-skin connection that the skin cells can directly communicate with the brain, with the mind, with our stress response through hormones that it secretes, through different stressors. And it can be emotional stress, can be physical stress, can be sun exposure, things like that can do this. Then, of course, now that we know about this, we want to know what to do about it. And there's quite a few things. And in the research papers that I read, the main thing that came up, the number one thing, was mindfulness. And there were some studies done specifically on skin and mindfulness, which showed that doing, and most of them were 8-week trials, because the research in meditation shows that generally about 8 weeks is when you're going to see brain structural changes. And in terms of seeing skin changes, they saw some fantastic skin changes, improvements in terms of reduction in flares, reduction in outbreaks, things like that, from doing a mindfulness practice. And the thing is with mindfulness, and I've said this before, is that a lot of the time people think that mindfulness means that you have to, crack out the caftan and the incense, sit in lotus position and, just put on this whole thing to meditate. Whereas mindfulness, yes, it can be a formal practice, but really it's anything where you can be fully immersed in the present moment. So that could be surfing, it could be rock climbing, it could be going for a walk in nature without the distraction of headphones. It could be doing some breathing exercises. It could be sewing, could be like anything that requires your attention. Cooking can be one. If you're someone, you might be someone, when you're cooking, you are fully immersed in it. And that's fantastic because that is actually going to be really good for your brain. It's going to be really good for your mind-skin connection. So mindfulness is the number one that's got the evidence base surrounding it, which is fantastic. And I mentioned breathing there. So you can just literally breathe and focus on your breathing, or you can employ specific breathing practices. I know I've spoken about belly breathing many, many times, so that's one. Also Nadi Shodhana, which is the alternate nostril breathing. If you've been in a yoga class, you've probably done this. That is very well known for balancing out your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which is your stress response and your relaxation response. So that's an awesome one. Obviously, with that one, you definitely need to set aside time to do it. Whereas with belly breathing, you can just do it any time. And there's also things like box breathing, where you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold it for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 4, you hold the exhale for a count of 4. So that's another option. Another one that I use quite a lot if I'm having trouble sleeping is breathing in for 4, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. So that's just a number of different breathing techniques you can use to really bring your nervous system into balance. So that's number 1. But then there's also things like reducing your toxin exposure, especially on your skin. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about obviously what you are, creams and lotions and toners and everything else that you put on your skin. Trying to find products that are as natural as possible does help a lot, where that you don't having that chemical load going onto your skin. Also, in terms of your clothing and your sheets, when you buy new clothes or sheets or towels or whatever, making sure that you wash them before you wear them, if at all possible, because they're particularly in new clothes and sheets, there are chemicals that are used in the factory to make them, not wrinkle, so that they look nice in the shop, so that you want to buy them. So if you wash those chemicals out, that is ideal. So then you're not going to be absorbing them through your skin. Really, really moving away from storing food, particularly food that's going to be heated, in plastics. That is a well-known problem. It's a well-known endocrine disruptor. Really, really just stop it if that's what you're doing. I've mentioned before, like if you're ordering takeaway and it's going to come in those little plastic containers and you've got leftovers, remove them from those containers. Do not microwave them in those containers. That is a very well-known way to absorb the chemicals from those containers. The same with those plastic disposable drinking bottles. For a start, we all know they're terrible for the environment, but also terrible for you to refill them or to leave them in your car and let them heat up and then drink out of them. Terrible. And I used to do this all the time when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry and I was a rep, and I would have my bottle of water in the car, and in Queensland, it's very hot in summer. And my gosh, I can't even imagine how much plastic I have or chemicals I've taken in over my lifetime just from that practice, just from that. So glass is ideal for putting water in for drinking and foods that you're going to be reheating. Just really avoid all of that plastic exposure. Also, reducing things like alcohol, reducing or eliminating smoking, vaping, also washing your fruits and veggies really thoroughly. I mean, obviously, if you can afford organic, that's great, but let's face it, most of us can't have that all of the time for every single piece of fruit and veg that we have. So totally just wash it really, really well. Download yourself the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. They are the lists of foods that are considered to be either the Dirty Dozen is the most sort of chemically loaded with pesticides, and then the least is the Clean 15. And that kind of gives you some guide of, like, if you do have some budget for organic food, look at the Dirty Dozen list. What can you buy, even if it's just broccoli? That you're getting organic, it will really help reduce your toxin load. And it's particularly important if you have a chronic illness, if you have an autoimmune condition, if you have cancer, if you have any kind of disease where you want to keep your body as clean as possible, then I would really recommend looking at the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 to help make informed choices about spending your food dollars. All right, I'm going to move away from that. So we've covered mindfulness, breathing, reducing toxin exposure, also increasing hydration. Obvious, but I have to say it for two reasons. Obviously, because it gives you that plumping of the skin. It helps to reduce that dehydration and that dehydrated skin look, but also it supports your detoxification processes inside the body, so that you are not necessarily needing to detox through the skin as much. So yeah, increasing hydration with water. Water, not cordial. You can use herbal teas, but yeah, water. Sleep. Getting your beauty sleep. It's a definite thing. And again, if you're a long-time listener, you know I bang on a lot about sleep. And as someone who does have sleep issues that I'm constantly working on, and I have some success, sleeping really well at the moment. But then there are times where I really, really don't. And having a good sleep routine, if you are having constant insomnia, getting that sorted out, talk to somebody, a practitioner who knows what to do with sleep and helping you to bring that back into your life. Also, having a diet that's high in antioxidants, that really helps with detox and helps reduce inflammation in the body. So that's things like green tea is awesome, brightly colored fruits and veggies, having vitamin C and vitamin E, whether in food or in supplement form, if you're having trouble getting good quality food, is also really good. Self-care, super important. Self-care. And one of the great things that you can do for yourself is some facial massage, and particularly using things like a gua sha or one of those tools, those roller tools. So I have gua sha tools. Some of you may know that I did actually study Chinese medicine, a master's of Chinese medicine. I did not quite a year. I actually pulled out part of the way through the second semester because I was just getting so overloaded with work. It was just not good for me, which was a shame because I really loved it and I was doing really well. But I just felt like something had to give, and it had to be that. So from that, some of the study I did, I've picked up some Chinese medicine kind of techniques, and gua sha tool is just like I've got ones, they're beautiful, they're amethyst, and they are just like a flat shape, and you just massage them across your skin, and it helps promote collagen production. It helps to release fascia in the face, which is probably the primary reason that I got them at the time, which was a number of years ago. And it feels so good. It's so relaxing to give yourself a facial massage. If you don't have any kind of tools to do that, like the roller or the gua sha, just using your fingers and maybe some rosehip oil or something like that. Oh my gosh, so nice. So I think that's probably the main things I wanted to get across today. Just the fact that we even have a mind-skin connection. For me, that was new information. So hopefully that was new for you and you found that really interesting. I'm going to be doing some more reading about that over the coming kind of weeks and months, and I might do another little skin series because I find these episodes are generally some of the more popular ones, and it's really interesting for me to record them. So if you've liked this episode, learned something new, I would love it if you could give me a review and share the podcast with your friends. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Ageless and Awesome podcast. If you liked today's episode, please make sure you click the little plus button if you're on Apple Podcasts or the follow button if you're on Spotify so that you can get each new episode delivered to you every single week. If you like free stuff, and who doesn't, then head over to susiegarden.com and grab my 8 essential age-defying secrets every woman over 40 should know right now. Or if you'd like to continue the discussion, head over to Instagram and DM me at Susie Garden Wellness. I'd love to connect with you.